The morning mist clung to the Puget Sound like a shroud, and through the weathered windows of Rosa Martinez's kitchen, Elena Vasquez watched the yellow excavator lumber into position across the street. Its mechanical arms stretched toward the red brick facade of the old Hartley Foundry building, like a metal predator preparing to strike. The machine's diesel engine rumbled through the quiet Georgetown neighborhood, drowning out the gentle bubbling of Rosa's coffee pot. Elena's breath fogged the glass as she pressed closer to the window, watching the operator climb into the cab, adjusting his hard hat, checking his controls. The sound of hydraulics hissing filled the air. In her mind, Elena heard something else entirely: the grinding shriek of metal against concrete, the thunder of collapsing steel beams, her father's voice calling her name one last time before the construction site accident that had changed everything 13 years ago. "Mija, your coffee is getting cold." Elena turned from the window, accepting the warm mug from Rosa's weathered hands. At 82, Rosa moved with the careful grace of someone who had learned to navigate a world that no longer quite fit her small frame. Her kitchen was a museum of memory: hand-painted tiles from Mexico, photographs of long-dead relatives, the scent of masa and cilantro that seemed permanently embedded in the walls. This house, the last original residence in a neighborhood that had once housed 300 families of shipyard workers, was scheduled for demolition in 6 weeks. "I won't let them tear it down, Rosa," Elena said, her voice carrying the quiet determination that had sustained her through architecture school, through the skeptical looks of professors who questioned whether the daughter of a construction worker belonged in their lecture halls. Rosa's eyes, still sharp despite her age, studied Elena's face. "Some battles, they choose us. Others, we choose them. You must be very careful which kind this is." Elena's phone buzzed against the kitchen table, a text from her boss at Holloway and Partners emergency meeting. 8 a.m., Georgetown project. Be there. The excavator's engine roared to life across the street, its mechanical arms swinging in a wide arc, testing its range of motion. In 3 hours, Elena would walk into a conference room and discover that everything she thought she knew about her life's work was about to change. The 20-minute drive from Georgetown to the gleaming towers of South Lake Union felt different this morning. As Elena navigated her Honda Civic through the maze of construction cranes and tech company shuttles, the city seemed poised on the edge of transformation or destruction. The Holloway and Partners building occupied 3 floors of a glass and steel monument to Seattle's tech boom. Elena's keycard beeped as she entered the elevator, riding up to the executive conference room where the Georgetown waterfront project team was already assembled. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Elliott Bay stretched toward the Olympic Mountains, the water gray-green under the overcast sky. "Elena, good, you're here." Patricia Holloway, the firm's founding partner, gestured to an empty chair at the conference table. "We want you to meet our new project director." Elena looked up and felt her breath catch. The man rising from his seat was tall, probably mid-30s, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, but something in his posture suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Adrian Sinclair," he said, extending his hand. His voice carried a slight accent she couldn't quite place: East Coast, maybe New York. "I've been looking forward to working with you." Elena shook his hand, noting the calluses on his palm, unexpected for someone who looked like he'd stepped out of an architectural magazine. "Elena Vasquez, I've been the lead landscape architect on Georgetown for 8 months now." "Yes, I've reviewed your preliminary designs." Adrian's tone was professional neutral. "Interesting approach to historical preservation." Something in the way he said "interesting" made Elena's shoulders tense. She'd heard that particular inflection before from professors who'd questioned her thesis on indigenous building practices, from clients who'd asked if she was really qualified to design their suburban gardens. Patricia cleared her throat. "Adrian comes to us from Sinclair Development Group in New York. He's got extensive experience with large-scale urban renewal projects." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's aggressive air conditioning. "Sinclair Development Group, the company that redeveloped the Brooklyn Navy Yard, among other projects, yes." Adrian's expression remained carefully neutral. "Interesting," Elena said, borrowing his inflection. "I read about that project. Wasn't there some controversy about the displacement of local artists and small businesses?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Patricia laughed nervously. "Well, I'm sure we can discuss project philosophy later. Right now, I want to show you both the updated plans from our clients. She pressed a button on the conference table, and a large screen descended from the ceiling. The Georgetown waterfront project logo appeared, followed by architectural renderings that made Elena's stomach lurch. Gone were her carefully planned green spaces, the restored brick buildings, the community gardens she designed to honor the neighborhood's working-class history. In their place stood a gleaming complex of glass towers, luxury condominiums, and a marina filled with yachts. As you can see, Patricia continued, the client has requested some modifications to our original preservation-focused approach. They're looking for something more contemporary. Elena stared at the screen, watching a computer-generated video tour of the proposed development. Families in expensive clothing strolled along manufactured waterfronts. Children played in pristine parks that had never known the weight of real history. Everything was clean, beautiful, and utterly soulless. This isn't renovation, Elena said quietly. This is erasure. Adrian leaned forward slightly. Sometimes, Elena, the most respectful thing we can do for a place is to give it new life rather than preserving its decay. Decay. Elena turned to face him fully for the first time, and she saw something flicker across his features, surprise maybe at the force of her reaction. Those buildings house 3 generations of families. The park I designed sits on the exact spot where the neighborhood children played for 60 years. That's not decay, Mr. Sinclair. That's history. History that most people will never see because they can't afford to live there anymore. Adrian replied, his voice still maddeningly calm. At least this development will bring economic opportunity to the area. For whom the yacht owners, the people buying million-dollar condos? Elena stood her chair, rolling backward. What about the families like Rosa Martinez, who've lived there for 40 years? Where do they go when their neighborhood becomes a playground for the wealthy? Patricia held up her hands. Elena, Adrian, perhaps we should... Who's Rosa Martinez? Adrian asked, and something in his voice made Elena pause. For just a moment, his professional composure had slipped, revealing something that looked almost like pain. She's an 82-year-old woman who lives in the last original house in the neighborhood, Elena said. The house your development would demolish to build a parking garage for the marina. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes focused on something beyond the conference room windows. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. I see, and she's refused to sell. She shouldn't have to sell. That house is her home. It's where she raised her children, where her husband died, where she's lived for 4 decades. It's not just a piece of real estate. Elena, Patricia interrupted, I understand your passion for the community aspects of this project, but we have to be realistic about what our clients want. And what they want is a profitable development that will attract high-end residents and businesses to the area. Elena felt the familiar weight of being the only person in the room who understood what was really at stake. She'd felt it in grad school when her professors dismissed her thesis on culturally responsive design. She'd felt it at previous firms when clients asked to speak to the real architect. She felt it now looking at Adrian Sinclair's perfectly composed face and realizing that he probably saw her as an obstacle to overcome rather than a colleague to collaborate with. I need to see the full development plans, Elena said finally. Everything, property acquisition lists, zoning changes, environmental impact studies, all of it. Patricia exchanged a glance with Adrian. That might not be necessary at this stage. It's absolutely necessary. Elena gathered her notebook and portfolio. Because if I'm going to be the landscape architect on this project, I need to understand exactly what we're asking the community to sacrifice and what we're offering them in return. She was halfway to the door when Adrian spoke again. Elena. She turned back, expecting another politely worded dismissal. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like respect in his expression. I'd like to see your original designs, he said, the preservation-focused plans. I want to understand your vision before we move forward. Elena studied his face, looking for signs of condescension or manipulation. She found neither, which somehow made her more suspicious. Why, Bam? Because Adrian said, standing to face her across the gleaming conference table, in my experience, the best solutions come from understanding all perspectives, even the ones that challenge our assumptions. For a moment, Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This wasn't the response she'd expected from someone who'd just shown her a development plan that would destroy everything she'd worked to protect. But then she remembered the gleaming towers on the screen, the manufactured perfection of the computer-generated families, and her resolve hardened. "My perspective is simple, Mr. Sinclair," she said. "Some things are more valuable than profit, and Rosa Martinez's house is one of them." She left the conference room without waiting for his response, but she could feel his gray eyes following her until the elevator doors closed. The Georgetown waterfront looked different in the afternoon light, the red brick buildings casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt streets. Elena parked her Civic next to the abandoned Hartley foundry and sat for a moment studying the landscape she'd been fighting to preserve. From here, she could see Rosa's house, a small craftsman-style cottage painted pale yellow with white trim, surrounded by a garden that defied the industrial decay around it. Elena had discovered this neighborhood by accident 2 years ago while researching historical land use patterns for a different project. She'd been drawn to the stories embedded in the architecture, the careful stonework of the foundry building, the practical beauty of the workers' cottages, the way the original planners had positioned everything to take advantage of the waterfront views while protecting residents from the harsh winter winds off Puget Sound. Now walking the familiar streets with her surveying equipment, Elena felt like a guardian preparing for siege. The excavator across from Rosa's house sat silent for the moment, but Elena knew it would return tomorrow and the day after, methodically erasing the physical evidence of a community that had existed here for over a century. She found Rosa in her back garden, kneeling beside a raised bed where late tomatoes still clung to their vines despite the October chill. Rosa wore a faded floral housecoat and rubber boots, her gray hair pinned back with bobby pins that caught the light. "Mija, you look troubled," Rosa said without looking up from her plants. More than usual. Elena set down her equipment and knelt beside the older woman. The soil smelled rich and dark, mixed with the salt tang of the Sound and the faintest trace of industrial metal that would always linger in this neighborhood. They brought in a new project director today, someone from New York who specializes in major redevelopment. Rosa's hand stilled among the tomato vines. "Ah, and this person, they want to tear down everything." Everything. Elena picked up a fallen tomato, turning it over in her palm. It was perfectly ripe, heavy with juice and warmth from the afternoon sun. "Rosa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Have any developers approached you directly? Anyone offering to buy your house?" Rosa sat back on her heels, studying Elena's face with those sharp, dark eyes. "Why do you ask this?" "Because I saw the property acquisition list today. Your house is marked as pending acquisition, but there's no record of any official offers or negotiations." A shadow crossed Rosa's expression so quickly that Elena might almost missed it. Perhaps there is some mistake in their paperwork. Elena wanted to press the issue, but something in Rosa's tone warned her off. Instead, she helped the older woman gather the ripe tomatoes, filling a wicker basket with red and green fruit that would probably be the garden's last harvest. They were walking back toward the house when Elena heard the sound of car doors slamming. She looked up to see a black SUV parked in front of the old foundry building and three figures emerging: a man in an expensive suit she didn't recognize, a woman with a clipboard and hard hat, and Adrian Sinclair. "Ms. Martinez, Ms. Vasquez." Adrian approached with that same careful composure he'd shown in the conference room, but Elena noticed the way his eyes moved across Rosa's garden, taking in details with what looked like more than professional interest. "I hope we're not intruding. I wanted to see the site firsthand before we finalize any plans." The man in the expensive suit stepped forward, extending his hand toward Rosa with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Marcus Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Development Group. I believe we've spoken on the phone." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She glanced at Adrian, looking for some sign of the family connection, but his expression remained neutral. Rosa, however, went very still. For a moment, she stared at Marcus Sinclair as if seeing a ghost. "Senor Sinclair," Rosa said finally, her accent thicker than usual. "Yes, we have spoken. I was hoping we might have another conversation about your beautiful property." Marcus continued, his tone patronizingly gentle. "I think you'll find our latest offer quite generous." "There is nothing to discuss," Rosa replied, her voice quiet but firm. This is my home. Marcus's smile faltered slightly. Mrs. Martinez won't understand your attachment to this place, but you must realize that the neighborhood is changing. Wouldn't you be more comfortable somewhere? Safer, more appropriate for someone of your age? Elena saw Rosa's hands tighten on the basket of tomatoes, and she stepped forward. Mr. Sinclair, Mrs. Martinez has made her position clear. This is private property, and she's under no obligation to sell. Marcus turned his attention to Elena, and she felt the weight of his assessment. You must be the landscape architect. Elena Vasquez, isn't it? I've heard you have some interesting ideas about historical preservation. I have ideas about respecting communities and the people who live in them, Elena replied evenly. Of course, very admirable. Marcus's tone suggested he found her admirable in the same way he might find a child's finger painting charming. Though I hope you understand that sometimes preserving the past can prevent us from building a better future. Whose future? Elena asked. Better for whom? Before Marcus could answer, Adrian stepped forward. Perhaps we should focus on the site survey today. Mrs. Martinez, would it be possible for us to examine the foundry building? We want to make sure our architects understand the existing conditions. Rosa nodded toward the old brick structure. The building, yes, but do not disturb my garden. As the development team moved toward the foundry, Elena lingered beside Rosa. The older woman was watching Adrian with an expression Elena couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and pain. Rosa, are you all right? Si, mija, only that young man. He looks like someone I used to know. Elena followed Rosa's gaze. Adrian was examining the foundry's brick facade with obvious expertise, running his hands along the mortar joints and peering up at the roofline. Even from a distance, Elena could see the concentration in his posture, the way he moved like someone who understood buildings from the inside out. Someone from the neighborhood, Elena asked. Rosa was quiet for so long that Elena thought she hadn't heard the question. Finally, the older woman shook her head. Perhaps not. Sometimes my memory, it plays tricks. But Elena noticed that Rosa continued watching Adrian until the development team disappeared around the corner of the building. And she noticed the way Adrian's eyes kept returning to Rosa's house as if he too were seeing something that stirred half-forgotten memories. The afternoon stretched long as Elena conducted her own survey of the neighborhood, documenting every detail that would disappear if the Sinclair development plan moved forward. She photographed the hand-carved corbels on the cottage facades, the community garden that had grown wild in the lot where the old corner store used to stand, the narrow alley where children still played despite the encroaching gentrification. She was measuring the setback of Rosa's front porch when Adrian appeared beside her, moving quietly enough that she startled when she noticed him. Sorry, he said. Didn't mean to sneak up on you. Elena glanced around, realizing that the black SUV and the rest of the development team were gone. Where's your father? Something flickered across Adrian's face. He had other appointments. The site assessment is my responsibility. Elena straightened, rolling up her measuring tape. In the golden light of late afternoon, Adrian looked less like the polished executive from the conference room and more like someone who'd spent time in the field. His suit jacket was folded over his arm, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with what looked like old scars. What did you think of the foundry building? Elena asked. It's remarkable, Adrian said, and the enthusiasm in his voice surprised her. The brickwork is original, 1920s, probably fired at the old Georgetown kilns. The structural system is post and beam with hand-forged hardware. They don't build like that anymore. Elena studied his face, looking for signs of the polite interest she'd expected. Instead, she saw genuine appreciation, the kind of response she might have expected from a preservation specialist, not a developer known for replacing historic buildings with glass towers. So you'll recommend preserving it? Adrian's expression grew more guarded. I'll recommend the most appropriate use for the site considering all factors, including profit margins, including economic sustainability. Yes. Adrian met her eyes directly. Elena, I know you think I'm here to destroy everything you care about, but I'm not the enemy. Then what are you? Adrian was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes moving across the neighborhood as if calculating possibilities. I'm someone who believes that places like this deserve a future, even if that future looks different from their past. Elena felt a familiar frustration building. Different how? by erasing the families who built this community, by pricing out everyone who can't afford $1 million condo, by creating economic opportunities that might actually sustain a community long-term, Adrian replied. Elena, look around. Half these buildings are empty. The foundry has been abandoned for 20 years. The corner store is boarded up. How is preserving decay honoring anyone's legacy? And how is gentrification honoring it? Elena shot back. You want to create a museum of working-class life for wealthy tourists. That's not preservation, that's performance. For a moment, they stood facing each other across the cracked sidewalk, the weight of their fundamental disagreement settling between them like a wall. Elena could hear the sound of traffic from the nearby freeway, the distant call of seagulls over the sound, the quiet rustling of Rosa's tomato vines in the evening breeze. Finally, Adrian spoke again, his voice softer. You mentioned Rosa Martinez has lived here for 40 years. What about her family? Children, grandchildren? Her children live in California now. Her husband died 15 years ago. She's alone. That's hard, Adrian said, and something in his tone made Elena look at him more carefully. Being alone in a place full of memories. And there was something personal in his voice, something that didn't match the polished professional persona he'd worn in the conference room. Elena found herself wanting to ask about it, but before she could speak, Adrian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and Elena saw his expression tighten. I need to go, but Elena, I meant what I said this morning. I want to see your original preservation plans, all of them. He was walking away when Elena called after him. Adrian, he turned back waiting. That house means everything to Rosa. Please remember that when you are making your recommendations. Adrian nodded once, then disappeared around the corner toward his car. Elena stood alone on the quiet street, watching the shadows lengthen across Rosa's garden, and wondering why a man who clearly understood the value of historical architecture was working so hard to destroy it. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, this is Adrian. Patricia gave me your contact info. Would it be possible to meet tomorrow to review your preservation plans? I'd like to understand your vision before we finalize anything. Elena stared at the message for a long moment. Every instinct told her that Adrian Sinclair was the enemy, the polished face of a development machine that would grind Rosa's neighborhood into profitable dust. But something about their conversation this afternoon suggested a complexity she hadn't expected. She typed back, fine, but we meet here in the neighborhood. If you want to understand my vision, you need to see what you're planning to destroy. His reply came almost immediately. Fair enough. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., Elena confirmed the time, then sat in her car watching Rosa's windows glow warm yellow in the gathering dusk. Tomorrow she would show Adrian Sinclair exactly what his family's development would cost. And maybe if she was lucky, she could make him understand why some things were worth more than profit. The excavator across the street sat silent in the darkness, waiting for morning to resume its work of erasure. But Elena wasn't ready to surrender yet. Rosa's house would stand another day and another after that for as long as Elena could find a way to protect it. She started the engine and drove home through the Seattle evening, carrying with her the scent of Rosa's garden and the memory of something unexpected in Adrian Sinclair's gray eyes. Something that looked almost like regret. Elena woke before dawn to the sound of rain against her apartment windows, the steady Seattle drizzle that would persist through April, washing the city clean, while threatening to wash away everything that mattered. She made coffee in the dark kitchen of her Capitol Hill studio, looking out at the Space Needle's red light blinking through the mist. Her father's construction helmet sat on the windowsill, where she'd placed it 13 years ago, a yellow hard hat with Vasquez written in black marker across the back. Miguel Vasquez had been wearing it the day the scaffolding collapsed at the Beacon Hill housing project, crushing him beneath tons of steel and concrete. Elena had been 16, and the sound of that collapse still echoed in her dreams. She touched the helmet's smooth surface, a morning ritual that grounded her before facing each day. Buenos dias, Papa, she whispered. I need your strength today. The drive to Georgetown took longer than usual through the rain-slicked streets. Elena stopped first at Café Besalú, buying 2 coffees and a bag of Rosa's favorite pan dulce before continuing to the waterfront. The excavator across from Rosa's house sat idle under a blue tarp, waiting for the weather to clear. Elena found Rosa in her kitchen, already dressed despite the early hour. The older woman wore a navy blue dress that Elena had never seen before, with a small silver cross at her throat. You look nice today, Elena said, setting the pastries on the counter. Special occasion. Rosa's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee. Perhaps, sometimes the past it comes looking for us, whether we are ready or not. Before Elena could ask what she meant, Rosa moved to the living room windows. Elena followed, and through the rain-streaked glass, she saw a figure standing at the foundry building's entrance. Adrian Sinclair, wearing a rain jacket and holding an umbrella, examining something in his hand. He's early, Elena said. See? He has been standing there for 10 minutes. Rosa's voice carried an odd note, something between sadness and anticipation. Just looking. Elena studied Adrian's posture through the window. Even at a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself, like someone preparing for something difficult. Rosa, yesterday you said he looked familiar. Are you sure you don't know him? Rosa was quiet for so long that Elena thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, the older woman spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a boy. Long ago, he used to come here with his mother. Adrian's mother. Perhaps the boy, he had the same eyes, gray like storm clouds. Rosa touched the silver cross at her throat. But that was many years ago, before the boy's father decided we were not suitable family. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. Rosa, what are you saying? But before Rosa could answer, there was a knock at the front door. Elena looked through the peephole to see Adrian waiting on the covered porch, rain dripping from his umbrella. When she opened the door, she was struck again by the intensity of his gray eyes, now dark with something that might have been nervousness. Good morning, he said. I hope I'm not too early. Not at all, come in. Elena stepped aside, watching as Adrian entered Rosa's living room. His gaze moved immediately to the photographs covering the mantelpiece, wedding pictures, children's school portraits, holiday gatherings spanning decades. Mrs. Martinez, Adrian said, his voice formal but gentle. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Rosa emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray with 3 cups of coffee and the pan dulce Elena had brought. When she saw Adrian standing in her living room, she stopped so abruptly that the cups rattled. For a moment, they stared at each other across the small space, an 82-year-old woman in her navy dress and silver cross, and a 34-year-old man who suddenly looked much younger than his years. Adriancito, Rosa whispered so softly that Elena almost missed it. Adrian's face went very pale. Abuela. The coffee tray slipped from Rosa's hands, crashing to the floor in an explosion of ceramic and coffee. Elena jumped forward to help, but Rosa was already moving toward Adrian, her weathered hands reaching for his face. Mijo, Rosa said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mi nieto, you came back. Adrian stood frozen as Rosa's hands framed his face, her thumbs tracing his cheekbones as if confirming he was real. I didn't know, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know you were still here. Elena stared at them, pieces of a puzzle falling into place with devastating clarity. The way Adrian had looked at Rosa's house yesterday, his unexpected knowledge of the neighborhood's history, the pain that had flickered across his face when he'd spoken about being alone with memories. You're Rosa's grandson, Elena said, her voice flat with shock. Adrian closed his eyes, his hands coming up to cover Rosa's where they still touched his face. I haven't seen her in 20 years. 23 years, Rosa corrected gently. Since you were 11 years old and your father decided I was not good enough to be your abuela. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Elena felt her worldview tilting, everything she thought she knew about this situation shifting into a new and terrible configuration. Adrian Sinclair wasn't just the face of corporate development, he was Rosa's grandson, returned to destroy the last piece of his own family history. I need some air, Elena said, backing toward the door. Elena, wait. Adrian turned from Rosa's embrace, but Elena was already outside, standing in the rain without her jacket. The Georgetown waterfront looked different now, charged with a significance Elena was only beginning to understand. The foundry building where Adrian had lingered that morning, the careful way he'd examined the neighborhood's architecture, his knowledge of 1920s construction techniques. It wasn't professional expertise, it was personal memory. She heard the door open behind her and felt Adrian's presence even before he spoke. She used to babysit me, he said quietly, when my mother was working, before my father decided that associating with Rosa would hurt his business image. Elena turned to face him. His hair was dark with rain, his expensive clothes soaked through, but he made no move to return to the dry house. So you came back to tear down her home. That's your idea of family loyalty. I came back because I needed the money, Adrian said, and the raw honesty in his voice stopped Elena's angry response. My sister Sophia has stage 3 ovarian cancer. The experimental treatments aren't covered by insurance. I've spent everything I had borrowed against everything I own. When my father offered me this job, you sold out your own grandmother for medical bills. Adrian flinched as if she'd struck him. I didn't know it was her house, not until yesterday. The property records just list our Martinez. There are probably a dozen Rosa Martinezes in Seattle. But you knew this neighborhood, you recognized it. I recognized the Foundry building. I spent summers here as a kid before my parents got divorced and my father got custody. Adrian wiped rain from his face with the back of his hand. Rosa used to take me to the Foundry and tell me stories about the men who worked there. My grandfather was one of them before he died. Elena felt her anger wavering, replaced by something more complicated. What happened? Why did your father cut her off? Because she was Mexican? Because she worked in a cannery? Because she lived in Georgetown instead of Bellevue? Adrian's voice was bitter now. Because Marcus Sinclair was building a real estate empire, and having a working-class Hispanic mother-in-law didn't fit his brand. The rain was coming down harder now, but neither of them moved toward shelter. Elena could see Rosa watching them through the living room window, her face etched with worry. So what happens now? Elena asked. You've found her. Are you going to protect her house or destroy it? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, water dripping from his dark hair. I don't know, he said finally. Elena, you have to understand, if I don't deliver this project, my sister dies. The contract with my father's company is the only way I can pay for her treatment. And if you do deliver it, Rosa loses everything. Yes. The simple honesty of his answer hit Elena harder than any justification would have. This wasn't about corporate greed or professional ambition. This was about a man forced to choose between two people he loved with no good options available. There has to be another way, Elena said. If there is, I can't see it. Adrian looked back at Rosa's house where warm light glowed in every window. I've been trying to figure out an alternative since yesterday. But the numbers don't work. My father's company needs this level of return on investment or they'll find another developer. And I need this contract or Sophia's treatment stops. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the impossible situation settling over all of them. When she opened them again, Adrian was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Will you still show me your preservation plans? He asked. Why, what's the point now? Because maybe if I understand what we're destroying, I can find a way to save part of it. Or maybe I can convince my father to modify the development. I don't know, but I have to try on. Elena studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or false hope. Instead, she saw something that reminded her of herself on the day she decided to become an architect, a desperate determination to build something better from the pieces of what remained. All right, she said finally, but I want Rosa to be part of the conversation. This is her home, her neighborhood. She deserves to know what's being planned. Adrian nodded, relief visible in his posture. Of course. They walked back toward the house together, their footsteps echoing off the wet pavement. Elena could see Rosa still waiting by the window, and she wondered what the older woman was thinking as she watched her long-lost grandson return to the place where his father had taught him to be ashamed of his own family. Inside, Rosa had cleaned up the broken coffee cups and made fresh coffee. She'd also changed clothes, trading the navy dress for her everyday housecoat and apron. The transformation felt deliberate, Rosa armoring herself for whatever conversation was coming. Mijo, she said to Adrian as they entered, you are soaked through. Let me get you a towel. I'm fine, abuela, Adrian said, but his voice caught on the word abuela, as if he wasn't sure he still had the right to use it. Rosa heard it too. She moved to him immediately, taking his face in her hands again. You are my grandson, she said firmly. Nothing changes that. Not your father's shame, not 23 years, not whatever brings you here today. You understand? Adrian's composure finally cracked. He pulled Rosa into a fierce embrace, his shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. Elena turned away, giving them privacy for their reunion, but she could hear Rosa whispering to him in Spanish endearments and forgiveness. that made Elena's chest tight with recognition of her own loss. When they separated, Rosa kept one hand on Adrian's arm as if afraid he might disappear again. "Now," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks, "tell me why you are here, the truth, mijo. All of it." Adrian glanced at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. Then he began to talk, explaining Sophia's diagnosis, the mounting medical bills, his father's job offer, the Georgetown development project. Rosa listened without interruption, her expression growing more grave with each detail. When Adrian finished, Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she squeezed his arm and said, "Your hermana, she is more important than my old house. You must do what you need to do to save her." "Buela no." "Sí," Rosa said firmly. "Family comes first. Always. Your grandfather, he would understand." Elena watched this exchange with growing frustration. "Rosa, you don't have to sacrifice your home. There has to be another solution." "What solution?" Rosa asked gently. "My house is old. I am old. Sophia is young with her whole life ahead of her." "Your life matters too," Elena said, her voice rising. "This neighborhood matters. The history here matters." "Of course it matters, mija, but not more than a life." Elena felt like screaming. Here was Rosa accepting the destruction of everything she'd built, and Adrian torn between saving his sister and preserving his grandmother's legacy. And Elena caught in the middle, watching two impossible choices destroy the people she'd come to care about. "Wait," Elena said suddenly. "Adrian, what exactly does your father's contract require? The specific deliverables?" Adrian looked up from where he'd been staring at his hands. "A mixed-use development with a minimum 50 units of luxury housing, 20,000 square feet of commercial space, and a marina with at least 30 slips. Total project value has to exceed $50 million. And if you deliver that, you get paid enough to cover Sophia's treatment. The contract is for $8 million over 3 years. Yes, that would cover everything." Elena's mind was racing. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her preservation plans, looking for something she'd noticed months ago, but dismissed as impractical. "Rosa," she said slowly, "you own your house and the lot it sits on. But what about the cannery building behind your property, the one that's been abandoned since the 70s? Rosa looked surprised. "That building, it belongs to the Port Authority, I think. They have been trying to sell it for years, but no one wants it. Too much contamination from the old machinery. Environmental contamination that would require remediation before any development," Elena murmured, still scrolling through her files. "Which means whoever buys it would have to clean it up." She found what she was looking for, a zoning map that showed not just current land use, but historical designations. The cannery building sat on a parcel that had been zoned for mixed industrial and residential use since the 1950s. "Adrian," Elena said, her voice gaining urgency, "what if we built the development on a different site? What if we could give your father everything he wants, the luxury housing, the commercial space, even the marina, but do it in a way that preserves this neighborhood?" Adrian leaned forward, studying Elena's phone screen. "The cannery building. It's the perfect size for your project, waterfront access for the marina. And if we design it right, we could create a development that actually serves the existing community instead of displacing it." "Elena," Adrian said gently, "the environmental cleanup alone would cost millions. And my father specifically wants this site because of Rosa's lot. It's the perfect location for the marina access. But what if we could prove that the cannery site would be more profitable long-term? What if we could show him a development plan that would exceed his $50 million requirement while preserving the historic district?" Elena was already sketching rough calculations on the back of an envelope. Marina slips rented for premium rates because of the industrial heritage setting. Luxury lofts in the renovated cannery building with views of the Sound. Ground floor commercial space that could house the kind of artisanal businesses that would attract tourists to an authentic historic neighborhood. "It could work," she said, her excitement building. "Adrian, it could actually work." Rosa was watching them both with a mixture of hope and wariness. "Mija, you must not get your hopes up too high. Men like Marcus Sinclair, they do not change their minds easily." "Maybe not," Elena said, "but we have to try. Don't we?" Adrian was studying Elena's rough sketches, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up. Elena, even if the numbers work, and that's a big if, there's still the question of whether my father would accept a different site. This whole project was his idea. He's the one who specifically targeted this neighborhood. Why Barchi? Elena asked. What makes this location so important to him? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. I'm not entirely sure. He said something about completing unfinished business when he first pitched the project to me. Rosa made a small sound, almost like a gasp. Both Elena and Adrian looked at her, but the older woman had turned away, staring out the window at the rain. Rosa, Elena said gently, do you know what Adrian's father meant by that? Rosa was quiet for so long that Elena thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps it is time you both understood the whole truth about Marcus Sinclair in this neighborhood. She moved to an old wooden cabinet in the corner of the living room, pulling out a cardboard box that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. From inside, she withdrew a handful of photographs, yellowed with age. This was taken in 1985, Rosa said, handing Elena a photograph. At my daughter Maria's quinceañera. Elena looked at the photo and felt her breath catch. It showed a younger Rosa beaming with pride, standing next to a beautiful young woman in a white dress. But it was the man beside them that made Elena's heart stop. Tall, dark-haired, with gray eyes that were unmistakably familiar. That's Marcus, Rosa said quietly, before he decided that his real estate business was more important than his family. Elena looked from the photograph to Adrian, understanding flooding through her like cold water. Marcus is your son-in-law. Was, Rosa corrected. He divorced my Maria when Adrian was 11. Said she was holding him back from his potential. Said this neighborhood was beneath him now. Adrian had gone very still. Rosa, he said carefully, are you saying that that Maria was your daughter, si mijo? Maria was my daughter, which makes me not just your grandmother by marriage, but your real abuela, the woman who held you when you were born, who taught you your first words in Spanish, who watched you take your first steps in this very room. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena watched Adrian's face cycle through shock, recognition, and something that looked like grief. She thought about the project plans, about Marcus Sinclair's specific targeting of this neighborhood, about his comment about unfinished business. He knows, Elena said suddenly. Your father knows exactly whose house he's trying to tear down. This isn't just about profit, it's about erasing the last piece of your mother's family. Adrian closed his eyes, his hands clenched into fists. When he opened them again, Elena saw something new there, a cold fury that transformed his entire appearance. 23 years, he said, his voice deadly quiet. 23 years he let me believe my grandmother was dead. 23 years he kept me from the only family I had left. Rosa reached for him, but Adrian stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the neighborhood clean, while the weight of old secrets settled like lead in the small living room. Adrian, Elena said carefully, what are you going to do? He turned back to face them, and Elena saw that the polished professional facade had finally fallen away completely. What remained was someone who looked very young and very angry and very determined. I'm going to save Sophia, he said simply, and I'm going to save Rosa's house, and I'm going to make my father understand exactly what kind of man he's become. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that the man standing in Rosa's living room was no longer the enemy she'd imagined. He was someone who had been as deceived and manipulated as the rest of them, someone who had just discovered that his entire adult life had been built on lies. How? She asked. Adrian's smile was sharp as broken glass. By giving him everything he asked for, just not the way he expected to get it. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through contacts. Elena, how quickly can you put together a comprehensive development proposal for the cannery site? If I work through the weekend, I could have preliminary plans by Monday. Good, because we're going to present Marcus Sinclair an offer he can't refuse. And we're going to do it in a way that exposes exactly what kind of man prioritizes profit over family. Rosa was watching them both with an expression that mixed pride and worry. Mijos, be very careful. Marcus, he is not a man who likes to be crossed. Then maybe it's time he learned, Adrian said, his gray eyes as hard as storm clouds. Elena, are you with me on this? Elena looked around Rosa's living room at the photographs spanning generations, at the woman who had become like family to her, at the man who had somehow transformed from enemy to ally in the space of a single morning. She thought about her father's construction helmet sitting on her windowsill, about the promise she'd made to herself to build something that mattered. "I'm with you," she said. And for the first time since the excavator had appeared across the street, Elena felt something that might have been hope. The rain had stopped by Saturday morning, leaving Georgetown's streets glistening under weak October sunlight. Elena arrived at Rosa's house to find Adrian already there, sitting at the kitchen table with architectural drawings spread before him and his laptop open to what looked like financial projections. He'd traded his expensive suit for jeans and a flannel shirt that made him look younger, more approachable. "Buenos dias, mija," Rosa said, pressing a cup of coffee into Elena's hands. "Adrian has been here since sunrise working on your plan." Elena studied the papers covering the table. Adrian had taken her rough sketches from yesterday and transformed them into something that looked almost professional. Detailed site maps, preliminary floor plans, even rough cost estimates for environmental remediation. "You've been busy," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "Couldn't sleep." Adrian looked up from his laptop, and Elena noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "I kept thinking about what my father said, about unfinished business. And I think I know what he meant." Oh. Adrian pulled up a file on his computer and turned the screen toward Elena. "I found the original property records for this neighborhood. In 1998, Marcus tried to buy this entire block for redevelopment. Rosa and my mother stopped him." Elena leaned forward, studying the documents. "How?" "They organized the neighbors, got the block designated as a historic district. The designation prevented large-scale demolition and kept property values low enough that families could afford to stay." Adrian's voice carried a note of pride. "According to these records, the campaign was led by Maria Sinclair and Rosa Martinez." Rosa had gone very quiet at the mention of her daughter's name. Elena reached across the table to squeeze the older woman's hand. "Your mother was fighting to protect this place, and my father never forgave her for it." Adrian closed the laptop with more force than necessary. "Elena, I think this whole project isn't just about profit. It's about proving he was right all along, that this neighborhood was disposable." The weight of that realization settled over them like a shadow. Elena thought about Marcus Sinclair's patronizing smile, his comments about places more appropriate for someone of Rosa's age. She'd assumed he was just another developer who saw communities as obstacles to profit. The truth was worse. He was a man trying to erase the evidence of his own failures as a husband and father. "Well," Elena said finally, "then we'll just have to prove him wrong." She pulled out her own laptop and opened the preservation plans she'd been working on for months. "Adrian, look at this. What if we could show that preserving the neighborhood while developing the cannery site would actually be more profitable than his original plan?" For the next 3 hours, they worked side by side, Rosa occasionally offering input or bringing them food they barely touched. Elena found herself surprised by Adrian's expertise. He understood not just the financial aspects of development, but the human elements that made places work. When she suggested incorporating affordable housing units into the cannery renovation, he immediately began calculating subsidy structures that could make it economically viable. "You really did used to design social housing," Elena said, looking up from a zoning map. 5 years in Portland before Sophia got sick." Adrian's fingers stilled on his keyboard. "It was the best work I ever did, building places where families could actually afford to live, where kids could grow up safely." He gestured toward the window where the foundry building was visible across the street. "Places like this used to be." Elena studied his profile as he spoke. In the morning light, with his guard down, she could see echoes of the boy Rosa remembered, the child who had played in these streets before his father taught him to be ashamed of where he came from. "What changed?" she asked gently. "Sophia's first diagnosis. I was 30, she was 25. The treatments were experimental, expensive. I needed money fast, and my father offered me a job with his company." Adrian's laugh was bitter. "Funny thing is, he'd been trying to recruit me for years. I always said no. Took a cancer diagnosis to make me desperate enough to say yes. And you've been working for him ever since." 3 years now. This is my biggest project yet." Adrian looked back at the computer screen where their alternative development plan was taking shape. "Elena, even if we can make the numbers work, there's still the question of whether my father will accept it. He's not just my boss, he owns the company that's contracted to pay me. If he doesn't like our proposal, then we make sure he can't say no. Elena pulled up another file, a comprehensive analysis of Seattle's development market that she'd compiled months ago. Look at these comparisons. Luxury developments that incorporate historical preservation consistently outperform generic new construction in both sales price and long-term value retention. She showed him photographs of similar projects in other cities, converted warehouses in Portland, historic districts in San Francisco, waterfront developments that had managed to preserve community character while attracting upscale investment. The key is authenticity, Elena explained. People will pay premium prices to live somewhere that feels real, that has actual history. Your father's current plan would create just another generic luxury complex. But this, she gestured at their emerging design, this would be unique, irreplaceable. Adrian was studying the screen with growing interest. The marina aspect actually works better with the cannery site. More protected water, better access from the sound. And the historic designation for Rosa's block would actually increase property values for the surrounding area. Your father could market the whole development as Georgetown Historic Waterfront or something like that. Premium branding, Adrian murmured. He likes premium branding. They worked through lunch and into the afternoon, their initial awkwardness giving way to a collaborative rhythm that surprised Elena. Adrian understood the business realities that made developments succeed or fail, while Elena brought the community perspective that most developers ignored. Together, they were creating something neither could have achieved alone. It was nearly 4 o'clock when Elena's phone rang. Patricia Holloway's name appeared on the screen. "Elena, where are you?" Patricia's voice was tight with stress. "Marcus Sinclair has been calling all morning. He wants to see the updated plans first thing Monday morning." Elena glanced at Adrian, who had gone very still. "We're still working on them. I should have a preliminary proposal ready by Monday." "Good, because Marcus made it very clear that if we can't deliver what he wants, he'll find another firm that can." Patricia's tone carried a warning. "Elena, I know you're passionate about preservation, but we need this contract. The whole firm needs this contract." After Patricia hung up, Elena and Adrian sat in silence for a moment. Through the kitchen window, Elena could see neighbors beginning their evening routines, an older man watering his small front garden, a woman walking her dog down the quiet street. "Monday morning," Adrian said finally. "That's not much time." "It's enough." Elena's voice was more confident than she felt. "Adrian, I need to ask you something. When we present this to your father, whose side are you going to be on?" Adrian looked up from the computer, meeting her eyes directly. "What do you mean?" "I mean he's going to fight this. He's going to try to convince you that preserving this neighborhood is naive, impractical, economically unsound. He's going to use Sophia's medical bills as leverage to make you abandon this plan." Elena leaned forward. "So I need to know, are you my partner in this, or are you still his son?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena could see Adrian wrestling with it, weighing loyalty against justice, family obligation against personal conviction. Finally, he spoke. "Elena, 3 days ago, I thought my grandmother was dead. I thought this neighborhood was just another development site. I thought my father was a successful businessman who maybe cut some corners, but generally tried to do right by people." He gestured toward the papers covering Rosa's kitchen table. Their alternative development plan, the historical documents, the photographs of similar preservation projects. "Now I know that my father has spent 23 years lying to me about my own family, that he's specifically targeting this neighborhood not because it's the best business decision, but because he wants to destroy the last evidence of my mother's activism." Adrian's voice grew steadier as he spoke. "So to answer your question, I'm on the side of the truth. And the truth is that Rosa deserves to keep her home, this neighborhood deserves to be preserved, and my father deserves to face the consequences of his choices." Elena felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a recognition that went beyond professional collaboration or shared goals. She was looking at someone who had just chosen principle over profit, family truth over family loyalty. "All right then," she said, "let's finish this." Sunday afternoon brought unexpected visitors to Rosa's house. Elena was in the kitchen printing out final copies of their presentation materials when she heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the window, she saw a young woman with Adrian's dark hair and gray eyes walking toward the front door, moving carefully as if each step required concentration. Adrian. Elena called toward the living room where he'd been making phone calls to environmental remediation specialists. I think your sister is here. The front door opened before anyone could answer it, and Sophia Sinclair stepped into Rosa's living room like she belonged there. She was beautiful in the way that serious illness sometimes makes people beautiful, her features sharpened by weight loss, her eyes too large for her face, her movements deliberate and graceful. Adriancito, she said, using the same diminutive that Rosa had used. You've been avoiding my calls. Adrian stood so quickly that his chair tipped backward. Sophia, what are you doing here? You should be resting. I should be meeting my abuela. Sophia's gaze moved past Adrian to where Rosa had emerged from the kitchen, and Elena watched recognition flicker across both women's faces. The abuela my brother just told me about yesterday after 23 years of believing she was dead. Rosa's hands flew to her mouth. Sofia Cita, mija, is it really you? Hola, abuela, Sophia said softly, and then she was moving across the room into Rosa's arms, both women crying and laughing simultaneously. Elena stepped back, giving the family space for their reunion, but she couldn't help noticing how fragile Sophia looked in Rosa's embrace. The young woman's clothes hung loose on her frame, and there was a yellow tinge to her skin that spoke of ongoing medical treatment. Mijo, Rosa said to Adrian, not releasing Sophia. Why didn't you tell me she was so thin? We need to feed her properly. Abuela, Sophia laughed. I'm fine. The doctors say I'm responding well to treatment. The doctors, Rosa snorted dismissively. What do they know about healing? You come to my kitchen, I'll show you healing. Elena caught Adrian's eye and saw her own mixture of joy and worry reflected there. Sophia's presence complicated everything. She was a living reminder of why Adrian had taken his father's contract in the first place, why he couldn't simply walk away from the Georgetown project. Sophia, Adrian said carefully, how did you find us? I called Patricia Holloway's office yesterday after you told me about Abuela. Her assistant said you'd been spending time in Georgetown working on site surveys. Sophia settled onto Rosa's couch with the careful movements of someone managing chronic pain. It wasn't hard to figure out which house. Elena noticed that Sophia was studying her with open curiosity. You must be Elena Vasquez. Adrian's told me a lot about you. He has, Elena glanced at Adrian, who had the grace to look embarrassed. He said you're the most stubborn person he's ever met, also the most principled. Sophia's smile was mischievous. Coming from my brother, that's quite a compliment. Before Elena could respond, Rosa reappeared from the kitchen, carrying a tray loaded with enough food to feed 6 people. Sofia Cita, you eat. Elena, Adrian, you eat too. I don't want to hear any arguments. They gathered around Rosa's small dining table, and Elena found herself observing the family dynamics with professional interest. Sophia and Adrian moved around each other with the careful consideration of people who had spent years managing medical crises together. Rosa fussed over Sophia with the intensity of someone making up for lost time, and Adrian watched both women with an expression that mixed love, protectiveness, and barely controlled anxiety. So, Sophia said, accepting a plate of Rosa's homemade tamales, Adrian tells me you two are plotting to overthrow our father's evil empire. Sophia, Adrian warned, what I think it's wonderful. Sophia's gray eyes sparkled with mischief. Do you know how long I've been waiting for someone to stand up to Marcus? The man's been a tyrant for 20 years. Elena looked between the siblings. You don't get along with your father. That's putting it mildly, Sophia said dryly. Let's just say that when you're financially dependent on someone for life or death medical treatment, you develop a very clear understanding of how they use emotional manipulation to control people. Sophia, Adrian's voice carried a warning, but she continued. Adrian's been Marcus's golden boy for 3 years now, but only because he had no choice. The moment Sophia doesn't need medical bills paid anymore, my dear brother will go right back to building affordable housing in Portland and pretending Marcus Sinclair doesn't exist. Elena found herself looking at Adrian with new understanding. Is that true? Adrian was quiet for a moment, pushing food around his plate. I've been thinking about it, he said finally. After Sophia's treatment is finished, after she's in remission, he looked up at Elena. Maybe it's time I remembered who I wanted to be before I got so focused on who I had to be. The conversation that followed revealed layers of family history that Elena was only beginning to understand. Sophia talked about growing up after her parents' divorce, splitting time between Marcus's Bellevue mansion and their mother's modest apartment in Georgetown. Adrian described the pressure of being groomed as Marcus's heir while secretly sending money to their mother behind his father's back. Maria never told Marcus about the money, Rosa said quietly. She was too proud, but she told me. She was so grateful that Adrian hadn't forgotten where he came from. Why didn't she ever reach out to me directly? Adrian asked. All those years I thought she didn't want to see me. Because Marcus told her you were ashamed of your childhood here, that you'd asked him not to mention Georgetown to your friends or colleagues. Rosa's voice was firm but not accusatory. Maria believed him. She thought she was protecting you by staying away. Elena watched Adrian's face cycle through grief, anger, and something that looked like determination. She thought about the presentation they would give tomorrow morning, about the choice Adrian would have to make between his father's approval and his own conscience. Adrian, she said gently, are you ready for tomorrow? I think so. He looked around the table at the three women who had somehow become the center of his world in the space of 4 days. Elena, I need you to know whatever happens tomorrow, whatever my father says or does, I'm not backing down. Rosa keeps her house. This neighborhood gets preserved. That's non-negotiable. Even if it means losing the contract, even if it means Sophia's treatment. We'll figure out Sophia's treatment. Adrian's voice was firm. There are other ways to get money, other clinical trials, other insurance options. What we can't replace is family. What we can't get back is time. Sophia reached across the table to squeeze her brother's hand. Adrian, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He turned to look at Rosa. Abuela, I lost 23 years with you because I believed my father's lies. I'm not losing any more time. The rain that had been threatening all afternoon finally arrived as evening fell, drumming against Rosa's windows with increasing intensity. Elena helped clear the dinner dishes, while Adrian and Sophia moved to the living room. Their heads bent together over Sophia's laptop as they researched alternative cancer treatment programs. Mija, Rosa said quietly, handing Elena a dish towel. You care about my grandson. It wasn't a question. Elena focused on drying the ceramic plates, buying herself time to think. He's not what I expected. No, Rosa agreed. Adrian has his father's intelligence and his mother's heart. It is a difficult combination for a young man. Elena thought about the past 4 days, the way Adrian had looked at the Foundry building with genuine appreciation. His careful questions about Rosa's family, the moment in the rain when he'd admitted he needed the money for Sophia's treatment. Rosa, what was his mother like? Rosa's expression softened. Maria was a fighter. Like you, she never backed down when she believed in something, even when it would have been easier. Rosa paused in her dishwashing. She would be proud of what Adrian is doing tomorrow, and she would like you very much. Before Elena could respond, Adrian appeared in the kitchen doorway. Elena, we should probably go over the presentation one more time. Make sure we haven't missed anything. They spent the next 2 hours at Rosa's dining table refining their arguments and anticipating Marcus Sinclair's likely objections. Sophia contributed unexpected insights about her father's business philosophy and negotiating tactics, while Rosa provided the historical context that gave their preservation arguments emotional weight. By 9 o'clock, they had a presentation that Elena thought could work if Marcus was willing to listen, if the financial projections held up under scrutiny, if they could convince him that preserving Georgetown's character was more profitable than destroying it. It's good, Sophia said, reviewing their final slides. Really good. But Elena, you need to understand something about Marcus. Facts and logic aren't always enough with him. He makes decisions based on emotion and ego as much as business sense. What do you mean? I mean that tomorrow morning you're not just presenting a development plan, you're asking him to admit that he was wrong about this neighborhood, wrong about Rosa, wrong about the choices he made 23 years ago. Sophia's expression was serious. That's not something Marcus Sinclair does easily. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. So what do you suggest? Give him a way to save face, make it seem like preserving the neighborhood was his idea all along. Let him be the visionary who saw the value in authentic historical development before anyone else did. Adrian was shaking his head. Sophia, we're not going to manipulate him into doing the right thing. This is about truth, about accountability. This is about saving Rosa's house, Sophia interrupted. And sometimes that means being strategic about how you present the truth. Elena looked between the siblings, understanding that they were approaching the same goal from different angles. Adrian wanted justice, a confrontation that would force Marcus to acknowledge the harm he'd caused. Sophia wanted results, a solution that would protect the people she loved, regardless of whether Marcus learned any moral lessons. What if we try both approaches, Elena suggested. Start with the business case. Let Marcus think it's his vision. But if that doesn't work, if he pushes back, then we tell him the truth about what this neighborhood really means. A backup plan, Adrian said slowly. More like a nuclear option, Sophia added. Because once you confront Marcus with his past failures, there's no going back. He'll fight you on everything just to prove he can. Elena thought about her father's construction helmet, about the promise she'd made to build something that mattered. Tomorrow morning, she would walk into a conference room and present the most important work of her career to a man who saw communities as obstacles to profit. Then we better make sure our first approach works, she said. The storm intensified as Elena and Adrian prepared to leave. Sophia had curled up on Rosa's couch with a throw blanket, accepting Rosa's offer to stay the night rather than drive back to her apartment in the rain. Mijo, Rosa said to Adrian at the door, remember tomorrow that family is not just about blood. Family is about who shows up when you need them. Elena thought about that as she and Adrian ran through the rain to their cars. In the space of 4 days, this group of near strangers had become something like family, united by their shared commitment to protecting a place that mattered, a community that deserved to survive. Tomorrow morning would determine whether that was enough. Monday morning arrived gray and cold with the kind of Seattle drizzle that seemed designed to dampen spirits. Elena met Adrian at Holloway & Partners 30 minutes before their scheduled presentation, both of them carrying copies of their proposal and wearing the kind of formal business attire that felt like armor. Ready for this? Adrian asked as they waited for the elevator. Elena thought about Rosa's house, about Sophia sleeping on the couch under her grandmother's hand-knitted blankets, about the excavator that would resume its work of destruction if their presentation failed. Ready, she said. The conference room was already occupied when they arrived. Patricia Holloway sat at one end of the long table flanked by 2 associates Elena didn't recognize. Marcus Sinclair dominated the opposite end, wearing an expensive suit and the kind of confident smile that suggested he expected this meeting to be a formality. Elena, Adrian, Patricia said, rising to make introductions. Thank you both for working so hard over the weekend. I understand you have some revisions to present. Significant revisions. Elena replied, setting up her laptop and connecting it to the room's projection system. We believe we have identified an approach that will exceed the original project goals while addressing community concerns. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression politely skeptical. I'm listening. For the next 20 minutes, Elena walked through their alternative proposal with the kind of detailed professionalism that had gotten her through graduate school presentations and client pitches. She explained the advantages of the cannery site, the market research supporting heritage-based luxury developments, the financial projections that showed higher long-term returns than the original plan. Adrian contributed the technical details and cost analyses, his voice steady and professional, despite the personal stakes involved. Elena found herself impressed by his composure. Nothing in his manner suggested that he was presenting a plan designed to thwart his own father's agenda. When they finished, the conference room was quiet except for the sound of rain against the windows. Marcus studied the projection screen with an expression Elena couldn't read, while Patricia and her associates reviewed the printed materials with obvious interest. Interesting, Marcus said finally, though I have some concerns about the environmental remediation timeline and the assumption that heritage branding will command premium pricing in this market. Actually, Adrian said, if you look at the comparable projects we analyzed, heritage developments consistently outperform generic luxury construction by 15 to 20% in both initial sales and long-term value retention. In other markets, perhaps, but Seattle's luxury buyers are primarily tech industry professionals who tend to prefer modern amenities over historical charm. Elena felt her carefully controlled professional demeanor beginning to slip. Mr. Sinclair, the market research we conducted was specific to Seattle. Tech professionals, particularly those who have moved here from other cities, are actively seeking authentic neighborhood experiences. They want to live somewhere with character, with history. Ms. Vasquez. Marcus interrupted, his tone politely condescending. I appreciate your passion for preservation, but I think you may be projecting your own values onto a market demographic you don't fully understand. The words hit Elena like a physical blow, the familiar sting of being dismissed, of having her expertise questioned because of her background, her ethnicity, her unwillingness to prioritize profit over people. I understand that demographic perfectly, Elena said, her voice dangerously quiet. I understand that they're looking for authenticity while simultaneously displacing the communities that created that authenticity. I understand that they want to live in neighborhoods with character while pricing out the families who gave those neighborhoods their character in the first place. Elena, Patricia warned, but Elena was past caring about diplomatic protocol. But what I really understand, Mr. Sinclair, is that your opposition to this plan has nothing to do with market research or environmental concerns or any other business justification you want to offer. Elena stood facing Marcus across the conference table. This is about Georgetown. This is about Rosa Martinez. This is about finishing what you started 23 years ago when your wife and mother-in-law stopped your first attempt to destroy that neighborhood. The silence that followed was electric. Elena could see Patricia's face cycling through shock, horror, and resignation, the realization that Elena had just destroyed any chance of salvaging the Sinclair development contract. Marcus's expression hadn't changed, but something cold had entered his gray eyes. I'm not sure what you're implying, Ms. Vasquez. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Elena pulled up a new slide, the historical documents Adrian had found showing Marcus's 1998 attempt to buy the Georgetown block. You tried to acquire Rosa Martinez's property once before. Your wife and mother-in-law organized the community opposition that stopped you. And now, 23 years later, you're using your own son to finish what you couldn't accomplish then. Marcus's professional composure finally cracked. Adrian, what exactly have you told her about our family's private business? Adrian had been silent throughout Elena's confrontation, but now he stood as well. I told her the truth, Marcus. Something I wish you'd tried sometime in the past 23 years. The truth, Marcus's voice was dangerously soft. The truth is that your mother was a naive idealist who thought preserving slums was more important than creating opportunities for economic development. The truth is that she chose her political causes over her family's financial security. The truth, Adrian replied, his voice steady, is that you were ashamed of where Maria came from, ashamed of Rosa, ashamed of Georgetown, ashamed of anything that reminded you that you weren't born into the upper class you were so desperate to join. Father and son faced each other across the conference table, 23 years of buried conflict finally surfacing. Elena could see Patricia and her associates exchanging glances, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Adrian, sir, Marcus said, his tone shifting to something that might have been paternal concern. I think you're allowing your emotions to cloud your business judgment. This development project is worth $8 million to you. That's enough to cover Sophia's treatment for the next 5 years, maybe longer. Are you really going to throw that away for the sake of one old woman's house? Elena saw Adrian flinch at the mention of Sophia's medical bills, the leverage Marcus had been using to control his son for 3 years. Sophia's treatment will be covered, Adrian said quietly. We'll find other clinical trials, other insurance options. What we can't replace is family. What we can't get back is the time you stole from us. Time I stole. Marcus's professional mask was gone, now replaced by something ugly and vindictive. I gave you opportunities your mother never could have provided. I gave you education, connections, a career. You gave me guilt and shame and 23 years of believing my grandmother was dead. Adrian's voice rose slightly. You made me complicit in destroying the community where I was raised, where my mother fought to protect working families like ours. Working families like ours? Marcus laughed, and the sound was bitter. Adrian, we haven't been a working-class family since I started making real money. That poverty, that neighborhood, those people, that was what I was trying to save you from. Elena watched this exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't just about a development project or even about family loyalty. This was about identity, about the stories people told themselves to justify their choices, about the price of trading authenticity for acceptance. Mr. Sinclair, Elena said into the silence that followed, Rosa Martinez isn't asking you to save her from anything. She's asking you to let her keep the home where she raised her family, where she's lived for 40 years, where she belongs. Marcus turned his attention back to Elena, and she saw something calculating in his expression. Ms. Vasquez, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding here. This development project will proceed as originally planned. If Holloway and Partners can't deliver what we've contracted for, we'll find another firm that can. He stood straightening his suit jacket with deliberate calm. Adrian, you have until Friday to decide whether you're working for me or against me. If you choose to proceed with this alternative proposal, you'll be breaking your contract with Sinclair Development Group, which means Sophia's medical bills become your responsibility alone. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Elena saw Adrian's face go pale, saw him calculate the impossible choice his father was forcing Rosa's house or Sophia's life. And Miss Vasquez, Marcus continued, his tone conversational. I want you to understand something. Georgetown is going to be developed whether you cooperate or not. The only question is whether you want to be part of creating something beautiful or whether you want to stand in the way of progress and watch your firm lose its biggest contract of the year. He gathered his papers and walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Adrian Rosa Martinez will be receiving an eviction notice later this week. The property acquisition we've been negotiating is moving forward, whether she agrees to tell or not. Eminent domain is a powerful tool when used properly. The conference room door closed behind Marcus with a soft click, leaving Elena and Adrian staring at each other across the ruins of their carefully crafted presentation. Eminent domain, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. He can't use eminent domain for a private development. He can if he has city council support, Adrian replied, his face gray with defeat. And my father has been cultivating relationships with Seattle city officials for 20 years. Elena sank into her chair, feeling the weight of complete failure settling over her. They'd had a plan, a good plan, a plan that could have saved Rosa's house while giving Marcus everything he claimed to want. But Marcus didn't just want profit, he wanted victory. He wanted to prove that his vision of progress was more important than any community's right to exist. What do we do now? Elena asked. Adrian was staring out the conference room windows at the Seattle skyline, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. We fight, he said, however we can for as long as we can. We fight. Elena thought about Rosa's house, about Sophia's medical bills, about the excavator waiting across the street from the last intact piece of Georgetown's history. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. And for the first time since this had all started, Elena wasn't sure they could win. The eviction notice arrived on Wednesday morning, delivered by a process server who apologized twice before handing Rosa the official documents. Elena found the older woman sitting at her kitchen table. An hour later, the papers spread before her like an indictment, her weathered hands trembling as she tried to read the legal language. 90 days, Rosa said without looking up. They give me 90 days to leave the house where I raised my children. Elena sat beside her, scanning the document. The letterhead read, City of Seattle Development Authority. But the contact information led back to Sinclair Development Group. Marcus hadn't been bluffing about his city council connections. Rosa, this isn't over. There are legal challenges. We can file appeals processes. Mija, I am 82 years old. I do not have time for legal battles that take years to resolve. Rosa folded the notice carefully, as if it were something precious rather than a document designed to destroy her life. Perhaps it is time to accept that some things cannot be saved. Elena felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. No, absolutely not. You are not giving up. Before Rosa could respond, Elena's phone buzzed with text from Adrian. Emergency. Meet me at the Foundry building. Now. Elena found Adrian standing in the shadow of the old brick structure, his expression grim. He wore jeans and a Georgetown high school sweatshirt that looked like it had been borrowed from someone smaller, probably Sophia. In the gray morning light, he looked more like the part Rosa remembered than the polished executive Elena had first met. The city approved Marcus's development proposal this morning, Adrian said without preamble. Emergency session. No public comment period, no community input. They're fast-tracking the permits. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. How is that possible? Marcus has been planning this for months, maybe years. He's already secured environmental impact waivers, zoning variances, even federal funding through some urban renewal program. Adrian ran his hands through his hair. Elena, they're not just taking Rosa's house. They're taking the entire historic district. What do you mean? Adrian pulled out his phone and showed her an email marked confidential. Elena read the subject line twice before the words sank in. Georgetown Waterfront Modernization Initiative, Phase 1 demolition schedule. 15 buildings, Adrian said, his voice flat, including the foundry, the old corner store, 3 residential blocks. Everything Rosa and my mother fought to preserve 23 years ago. Elena stared at the demolition schedule, seeing dates and addresses that represented the complete erasure of a community. Adrian, this is exactly what your mother stopped in 1998. How is Marcus getting away with it now? Because he's not just a developer anymore. He's a city planning consultant, a member of the mayor's Economic Development Advisory Board, a major campaign contributor. Adrian's laugh was bitter, and because there's no Maria Sinclair organizing the opposition this time. There's us. Elena, look at this list. Adrian scrolled through the email. City Council approval, federal funding, construction crews scheduled to begin next week. My father has been planning this for years. We're not fighting a development project. We're fighting a political machine. Elena thought about Rosa sitting at her kitchen table, accepting defeat with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived too many losses to rage against one more. She thought about Sophia, whose medical bills had become a weapon Marcus used to control his son. She thought about her father's construction helmet, about the promise she'd made to build something that mattered. Then we build a bigger machine, she said. Adrian stared at her. What? Your father spent years cultivating political relationships, right? Positioning himself as the visionary who could modernize Seattle's industrial neighborhoods. Elena pulled out her own phone and began scrolling through her contacts. Well, 2 can play that game. Elena, we don't have years. We have days, maybe hours before the demolition crews arrive. Then we work fast. Elena was already dialing a number. Adrian, do you trust me? Yes, he said without hesitation. Good, because we're about to find out whether community organizing is really dead or whether it just needs the right catalyst. Elena's first call was to Dr. Helen Chen, a urban planning professor at the University of Washington, who had been Elena's graduate advisor. Dr. Chen had connections throughout Seattle's academic and activist communities, and more importantly, she had credibility with local media. Elena, Dr. Chen said after Elena explained the situation, what you're describing sounds like a textbook case of environmental racism. A wealthy developer using political connections to destroy a historic Latino neighborhood. That's exactly the kind of story the Seattle Times has been investigating. Elena's second call was to Marcus Rodriguez, a community organizer with Puget Sound Sage, who specialized in fighting gentrification. Marcus had grown up in Georgetown before his family was priced out in the 1990s, and he'd been watching Sinclair Development Group's activities with growing concern. Elena, I've been waiting for someone to take on Marcus Sinclair, Marcus Rodriguez said. Give me 2 hours and I can have 50 people at Rosa's house ready to stand between the bulldozers and her front door. The third call was to Sophia, who answered on the first ring. Elena, what's wrong? Everything. Sophia, I need you to trust me and I need you to be strong because we're about to ask you to do something that might put your medical treatment at risk. There was a long pause. What do you need? Elena explained her plan while Adrian listened with growing amazement. It was audacious, possibly illegal, and almost certainly doomed to failure. It was also the only chance they had. Sophia, Elena said finally, your father has been using your illness to control Adrian for 3 years. What if we use that same leverage against him? Another pause longer this time. Elena, are you asking me to go public with my medical condition? I'm asking you to tell your story about how Marcus has been using your cancer as emotional blackmail, about how he forced Adrian to choose between saving his sister and protecting his grandmother. Elena took a deep breath. I'm asking you to help us expose exactly what kind of man Marcus Sinclair really is. And if it backfires, if the publicity makes things worse for Adrian, for Rosa, Elena looked at Adrian, who was listening to her half of the conversation with an expression that mixed hope and terror. Then at least we'll have fought. At least we'll have told the truth. Sophia was quiet for almost a minute. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. What do you need me to do? Thursday morning brought a crowd to Georgetown that the neighborhood hadn't seen in decades. Elena arrived at Rosa's house to find the street filled with people, university students with protest signs, elderly residents carrying folding chairs, families with children who looked like they were attending a community festival rather than a political demonstration. Marcus Rodriguez had done more than deliver 50 people. He'd mobilized a coalition that included environmental justice activists, historical preservation societies, Latino community organizations, and urban planning advocates from across Seattle. Local news trucks lined the block, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray sky like mechanical flowers. Mija, Rosa said, watching the crowd from her front porch. What have you done? What your daughter would have done, Elena replied. What she did do 23 years ago. Elena had spent the previous evening coordinating with Dr. Chen and Marcus Rodriguez, crafting a media strategy that framed the Georgetown development as a test case for Seattle's commitment to environmental justice and historic preservation. They'd reached out to city council members who had voted for the project, challenging them to explain why they'd approved a development that would displace elderly residents and destroy a historic Latino neighborhood. But the real game changer had been Sophia's decision to go public. At 10 o'clock that morning, Sophia Sinclair stood on Rosa's front porch with a microphone in her hand and told her story to the assembled crowd and television cameras. She talked about her cancer diagnosis, about her brother's sacrifice, about their father's manipulation of family loyalty for business gain. My father told Adrian that the only way to save my life was to destroy our grandmother's home. Sophia said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent street. He made my illness into a weapon. He used my brother's love for me to force him into betraying everything our mother taught us about protecting communities like this one. Elena watched from the crowd as Sophia spoke, seeing the young woman's courage transform the entire dynamic of the conflict. This wasn't just about development politics anymore. This was about family, about the stories people told to justify their choices, about the price of trading principle for profit. When Sophia finished speaking, the crowd erupted in applause. But Elena was watching the black SUV that had just turned onto the street, recognizing Marcus Sinclair's vehicle as it approached the demonstration. Marcus emerged from the SUV wearing his usual expensive suit, but his composed professional demeanor had been replaced by something harder. Elena could see the calculation in his eyes as he surveyed the crowd, the media presence, the political nightmare his son and daughter had created for him. Adrian, Marcus called across the crowd, his voice carrying easily in the sudden quiet. Sophia, I think it's time we had a family conversation. We're having it right here, Adrian replied, moving to stand beside Sophia on the porch. In front of the community you're trying to destroy. Marcus's smile was sharp as broken glass. Actually, son, I think you'll want to have this conversation privately. Because I have some news about Sophia's medical insurance that I think will interest you. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She could see Sophia's face go pale, see Adrian's composure begin to crack. What are you talking about? Sophia asked. I'm talking about the experimental treatment program at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, the one that's been paying for your care for the past 18 months. Marcus pulled out his phone and began reading from an email. Due to recent changes in program funding, patient Sophia Sinclair's coverage will be discontinued effective immediately unless alternative payment arrangements can be secured. The crowd had gone silent, sensing that something crucial was happening, but not understanding the details. Elena watched Adrian's face cycle through shock, disbelief, and growing fury. You arranged for her coverage to be canceled, Adrian said, his voice deadly quiet. I arranged for it to be contingent on your continued employment with Sinclair Development Group, Marcus replied. Sophia, as my daughter, you'll always have access to the best medical care available. But Adrian's little rebellion here has consequences. Elena saw Sophia take a step forward, and for a moment she thought the young woman might collapse. Instead, Sophia straightened her shoulders and looked directly at her father. Marcus, she said, using his first name rather than calling him father, you just threatened to let me die in order to force my brother to destroy our grandmother's home. I'm ensuring that my family's medical needs are properly provided for. You're proving that Elena was right about you. Sophia's voice was getting stronger. You're proving that you'll sacrifice anyone and anything for your business interests, including your own children. The crowd had begun to murmur, sensing the drama playing out on Rosa's porch, even if they couldn't hear every word. Elena could see news cameras focusing on the family confrontation, capturing what was probably the most devastating publicity Marcus Sinclair had ever received. Sophia, you're overwrought, Marcus said, his tone shifting to something that might have been paternal concern. Why don't you come home with me and we can discuss your treatment options privately? My treatment options? Sophia laughed and the sound was bitter. Marcus, I've been in remission for 6 months. The experimental program worked. My oncologist cleared me for normal activities 3 weeks ago. The silence that followed was electric. Elena stared at Sophia, understanding beginning to dawn. You've been in remission for 6 months, Adrian said slowly, and you didn't tell me because I knew what would happen if you found out you didn't need to work for Marcus anymore, Sophia replied. I knew you'd quit, and I wanted to be sure the cancer was really gone before you gave up that income. She turned to face Marcus. What I didn't know was that our father was planning to use my medical condition as blackmail indefinitely. Elena watched Marcus's face as he realized that his primary leverage over Adrian had just evaporated. Without Sophia's medical bills to hold over his son's head, he had no way to force Adrian's compliance. This changes nothing, Marcus said finally. The Georgetown development will proceed as planned, with or without Adrian's cooperation. Actually, said a new voice from the crowd, it changes everything. Elena turned to see a woman in a dark suit approaching the porch, flanked by 2 men who looked like federal agents. The woman held up an official-looking badge. Mr. Sinclair, I'm Agent Rosa Martinez with the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force. We'd like to speak with you about your use of federal urban renewal funds for this development project. The FBI investigation that followed revealed the scope of Marcus Sinclair's corruption with devastating clarity. Federal funds intended for low-income housing had been diverted to support luxury development. City officials had received campaign contributions in exchange for expedited permits. Environmental impact studies had been falsified to hide contamination that would have required expensive remediation. Elena watched the story unfold over the following weeks with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. Marcus was arrested on federal corruption charges. The Georgetown development project was suspended pending investigation. The eviction notices were voided. But the real transformation happened more quietly in Rosa's kitchen over morning coffee and evening meals that gradually expanded to include neighbors, activists, and the slowly healing Sinclair family. Mija, Rosa said one Saturday morning in November as Elena helped her plant winter vegetables in the back garden. Do you think Adrian will stay in Seattle? Elena looked across the garden to where Adrian was installing a new fence post with the focused intensity he brought to every project. He'd resigned from Sinclair Development Group the day after his father's arrest, but he hadn't yet decided what to do next. I think that depends on whether he can find work here that matters to him, Elena said carefully, and whether there are other reasons for him to stay. Rosa added with the kind of gentle directness that elderly women seem to specialize in. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. Over the past month, she and Adrian had worked together on a dozen different projects, helping Rosa weatherize her house for winter, organizing a neighborhood cleanup day, developing preliminary plans for a community garden in the lot where the old corner store had stood. Their partnership had evolved from professional collaboration to something that felt like friendship and possibly something more. Rosa, Adrian, and I work well together, Elena said diplomatically. See, I have noticed this. Rosa's smile was mischievous. I have also noticed the way you look at each other when you think no one is watching. Before Elena could respond, Sophia's voice called from the back door. Elena, Rosa, come inside. The mayor's on TV, talking about the Georgetown Historic District designation. They gathered around Rosa's old television to watch Mayor Jennifer Durkin announce the city's new commitment to historic preservation and community-centered development. Georgetown would be designated as Seattle's newest historic district, with federal funding for preservation and affordable housing that would ensure longtime residents could remain in their neighborhood even as property values increased. The Georgetown Historic District represents Seattle's commitment to inclusive development. the mayor said, standing in front of the old foundry building. This neighborhood's working-class history deserves to be preserved and celebrated, not erased in the name of modernization. She's using our talking points, Elena said with satisfaction. Your talking points, Adrian corrected. Elena, none of this would have happened without your vision of what this place could become. Elena thought about the morning 4 weeks ago when she'd first seen the excavator across from Rosa's house, about the way the neighborhood had looked then isolated, forgotten, marked for destruction. Now the same streets were busy with preservationists, city planners, and neighbors working together to ensure Georgetown's future honored its past. It wasn't just my vision, Elena said. It was your mother's vision, Rosa's vision, the vision of everyone who believed this community was worth saving. Sophia, who had been unusually quiet during the news coverage, suddenly spoke up. Adrian, have you made a decision about the job offer from Portland? Elena felt her stomach drop. Adrian had mentioned receiving calls from his former colleagues in Portland, but she hadn't realized he was seriously considering leaving Seattle. Actually, Adrian said, glancing at Elena, I've been thinking about something else. Elena, remember that conversation we had about the cannery building? About converting it into mixed-use housing? Of course. But with Marcus's project canceled, there's no funding for what if there was. Adrian pulled out his laptop and opened a file Elena hadn't seen before. I've been working with some investors who specialize in community-centered development, people who believe in building places where families can actually afford to live. Elena studied the screen, seeing detailed architectural plans for converting the old cannery into affordable housing, artist studios, and ground-floor commercial space for local businesses. It was everything they'd dreamed of during those long planning sessions at Rosa's kitchen table, but refined and expanded into something that could actually work. Adrian, this is beautiful, Elena said, scrolling through the designs. But how would you fund it? Combination of Sheraton, Federal Historic Preservation Grants, City Affordable Housing Funds, private investment from developers who actually care about communities. Adrian's voice was gaining enthusiasm as he spoke. Elena, I want to start a new kind of development company. One that builds places people want to live, not just places that generate maximum profit. Elena felt something warm and hopeful unfold in her chest. And you want to base this company in Seattle? I want to base it in Georgetown, Adrian said, in the neighborhood where my mother taught me that communities are worth fighting for, with partners who understand that authentic development means listening to the people who already live in a place. Rosa was watching this exchange with obvious delight. Mijo, this sounds like the work you were meant to do. It is, Adrian said, but I can't do it alone. Elena, I know you have a good job with Holloway and Partners, and I know this would be a risk. Yes, Elena interrupted. Yes, you think it's a risk, or yes, you'll do it. Elena looked around Rosa's living room at the photographs spanning generations, at Sophia grinning with excitement, at the man who had somehow transformed from adversary to partner to something that felt like the beginning of a shared future. Yes, I'll do it, she said. Yes, I want to build something that matters. Yes, I want to work with people who understand that communities are more important than profit margins. And yes, Sophia added with a grin, you're completely in love with my brother and have been for weeks. Elena felt her face burn with embarrassment, but when she looked at Adrian, she saw her own feelings reflected in his gray eyes. Affection, attraction, and something deeper that might have been the recognition of finding someone who shared your values, your vision, your commitment to building a better world. Is it that obvious? Elena asked. Only to everyone who's ever seen you two in the same room, Rosa said dryly. Mijo's life is short, love is precious, don't waste time pretending otherwise. 6 months later, the grand opening of the Georgetown Community Development Initiative took place on a sunny Saturday in May, with the kind of perfect Pacific Northwest weather that made everything seem possible. Elena stood in the renovated cannery building's central courtyard, watching families explore the artist studios, the community workshop spaces, and the affordable housing units that had already provided homes for 12 families. Not bad for our first project, Adrian said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee from the new community cafe. Not bad, Elena agreed, accepting the coffee and looking around at the scene. Children played in the courtyard while their parents talked with neighbors, new and longtime residents, mixing in the kind of organic community interaction that Elena had been hoping to create. Through the courtyard's large windows, she could see Rosa's house, its yellow paint fresh and bright, surrounded by the garden that had expanded to include vegetables shared with the entire neighborhood. Sophia had moved into one of the cannery's affordable housing units, close enough to help care for Rosa while maintaining her independence as her health continued to improve. Elena, Adrian said, his voice suddenly serious. There's something I've been wanting to ask you. Elena turned to look at him, noting the nervousness in his expression. What? We've been partners for 6 months now. Business partners, I mean. And I think we work well together. We do. And we've been other kinds of partners too. Personal partners. Elena smiled. We have. Adrian took a deep breath. Elena Vasquez, would you consider being my partner in everything permanently? He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Elena felt her heart stop. Adrian, are you? I am asking if you'll marry me, if you'll build a life with me, build a company with me, build communities with me. Adrian opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring set with a stone the color of Puget Sound. I'm asking if you'll be my partner in creating the kind of world we both believe in. Elena looked around the courtyard again, seeing the future they'd built together from the ruins of Marcus Sinclair's vision of progress. She thought about her father's construction helmet, about the promise she'd made to build something that mattered. She thought about Rosa's wisdom, Sophia's courage, and the man standing before her who had chosen principle over profit, truth over family loyalty, love over fear. Yes, she said, feeling tears of joy starting in her eyes. Yes to all of it. Yes to building a life together. Yes to creating communities that matter. Yes to believing that love and justice and authentic development are all possible. Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, and Elena saw that it fit perfectly, like everything else about their partnership. Their shared vision, their commitment to building bridges between what was and what could be. From across the courtyard, Elena could hear Rosa's voice calling to them in Spanish, offering congratulations, and probably planning their wedding before they'd even finished getting engaged. Sophia was already taking pictures with her phone, documenting another milestone in the family that had rebuilt itself around love rather than control. The Georgetown waterfront stretched out beyond the cannery building, the sound sparkling in the afternoon sunlight. In the distance, Elena could see construction cranes working on other development projects throughout Seattle, some of them thoughtful and community-centered, others driven by the same profit at any cost mentality that had nearly destroyed this neighborhood. But here in this place where she'd first learned to fight for what mattered, Elena felt the deep satisfaction of having built something authentic, something that honored both the past and the future, something that proved communities could thrive when development served people rather than demanding that people serve development. So, Adrian said, wrapping his arms around her as they watched families enjoy the space they'd created together. Ready for our next project? Elena leaned into his embrace, thinking about the proposals on their desk, the neighborhoods that needed advocates, the communities that deserved developers who understood that places were more than just real estate. Ready, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Behind them, Rosa's laughter echoed across the courtyard, mixing with the sounds of children playing and neighbors talking and life continuing in all its messy, complicated, beautiful authenticity. It was the sound of community, the sound of home, the sound of building bridges that could support the weight of shared dreams. Elena had kept her promise to her father. She had built something that mattered, and now with Adrian beside her and their shared future stretching out like the waters of Puget Sound, she was ready to build even more.